Mic check, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Good evening. I'm Joseph Darius Jafari, the editor-in-chief of Lookout, and I'll be the moderator for this evening's debate. The Citizens Clean Elections Commission is the official sponsor of this event tonight. As the state's voter education agency, Clean Elections provides voters the opportunity to hear directly from the candidates, ask questions on the issues that matter most to them, and make an informed vote. Voters that are watching this debate live, you can submit a question at any time by email at debates@kc-a.com. You can text us at 408-302-1810, or you can call us at 480-937-1253. We may not get to all audience questions, but we will do our best. Each district in Arizona gets 2 seats in the House of Representatives, and tonight we are speaking to 2 of the 3 people who are battling for those seats to represent District 11 in Phoenix, which includes downtown, South Phoenix over to Laveen, and parts of West Phoenix. Those people tonight are both incumbents Representative Oscar de los Santos, who was elected in 2022, and Representative Junel Cavero, who took over for Marcelino Quinones this year after he resigned from his seat. Isaac Ruiz is also on the ballot, and we invited him to join us tonight, but he did not confirm his appearance. By happenstance, by the way, I am also a resident of LD11, so I look forward to hearing both of your responses tonight because it affects me personally. As this is a primary election debate, candidates are competing against each other's in their party to become the official party nominee. All registered voters, including independent voters, can vote in the primary. If you are an independent voter, you can choose a single party ballot, and if you wish to vote. So we're going to start with some table setting for this debate tonight. The questions have been submitted by voters in the districts, as well as have been crafted by myself and others at my staff at Lookout. They are broken up into social issues, immigration, housing, climate, and we'll end the conversation with a trust in politics conversation. Each one of the candidates are guaranteed a minimum of 15 minutes of speaking time each. They will have 1 minute of opening statements and closing statements and 90 seconds for responses to voter questions. We encourage an open exchange of dialogue between the opponents. I simply ask that you refrain from interrupting each other, and that if you want to respond to a comment made by the other candidate, you keep that response under 1 minute. I will be the timekeeper, and if needed, I will limit responses for time management purposes. I'll also remind the candidates and the audience that this is a respectful, courteous, and professional environment. Our goal tonight is to inform voters. Let's not try to make this go viral. We are going to start with opening statements. You will each have 1 minute. Before I do that, I just want to make sure to re-up the ways that you can reach out to us. Again, you can submit your questions by email to debates@kc-a.com. You can text us at 408-302-1810, or you can call us at 480-937-1253. The order in which the candidates will deliver their opening statements is done in alphabetical order by name. Closing comments will go in reverse order. And so with that, Representative Cavero, will you please start us off with your opening statement? You have 1 minute.
Thank you so much. It's great to meet everyone tonight. For those who don't know, I'm a working mom that has lived in this district for a very long time. My 2 daughters attend public school here in Phoenix, and when they get out of school, I'm the one who picks them up. The reason that I'm running for State House is because I know how hard our families in Phoenix, Laveen, and Guadalupe are working. I'm one of them. And I talk to those families every day. Honestly, they deserve so much more than what we're getting. Gas prices, rent, and cost of groceries are just out of control. We need to build an economy where people can afford to live. In the legislature, I'll work to fight to increase minimum wage, increase wages for all our working families in our community, provide grants and tax incentives to help our small businesses, bring and create more good-paying jobs in our district, strengthen protections against workplace discrimination and harassment, and protect the rights of our workers to organize and join unions. We want to increase funding for homeless prevention programs and support housing. I want to advocate for higher pay and better working conditions for our teachers and staff. I'm invested in our community, and I want to see it thrive for my children and the families around us. We're living in a stressful and uncertain time, and we need leaders that will fight to ensure that we are safe and we can overcome this affordability crisis. I would be the state representative that brings your voice and your interests above everyone else's in the State House.
Thank you very much. Bit over a minute 30, but to be fair, I'll give Oscar, Representative de los Santos, you also will have a minute 30.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Janelle. Thank you, Clean Elections. And thank you, everybody watching at home. I'm Representative Oscar de los Santos. I'm the proud son of working class Mexican immigrants. I'm a former public school teacher in South Phoenix, a former food bank worker. And in 2022, I was honored that you entrusted me with the responsibility to represent you, your families, your neighbors, and your friends at the state capitol. Ever since then, I have worked around the clock to try to deliver for you and your families and to take on the MAGA extremist politicians that are trying to rip away our rights and our freedoms. And I think I've delivered. I'm proud that just a couple weeks ago, I helped lead the charge to repeal the despicable 1864 abortion ban. One of the first bills I introduced was the Arizona Medical Debt Cancellation Act, because I believe that no family should go broke or bankrupt simply because they got sick. And I am so proud to let you know that Governor Katie Hobbs enacted my bill via executive order. And today, over 1 million families across Arizona are going to benefit from roughly $2 billion of medical debt cancellation. I've also been focused on tackling our homelessness and housing crisis. We know that rent and mortgages are out of control, and I am working my best to take on the corporate landlords and private equity firms that are jacking up the cost of rent and making it impossible to own a home. I hope to earn your support. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you. So we're going to get some hot topic emotional discussions out of the way and put them on top. The first question is going to be for Representative de los Santos. So you were recently accused of inciting a riot by Republicans for yelling shame in the House against your colleague Matt Gress in regards to not putting a vote to repeal the abortion ban, the 1864 abortion ban. I want to first give you the opportunity to simply address that. Why did you do it, and what did you feel was at stake? You have 90 seconds.
Thank you so much. Listen, where I come from, we call it like I see it. And when somebody does something shameful, we call it what it is, shameful. So this was the day after, or 2 days after, the Arizona Supreme Court reinstated the 1864 abortion ban. We know that 9 out of 10 Arizonans oppose that kind of ridiculous policy, insane policy. So we try to force a vote to repeal it. It's one thing if you want to vote against it, but what the Republicans did was shameful. They gavelled out. They immediately sent us to recess and blocked the vote from even happening. They didn't do it once. They didn't do it twice. They didn't do it 3 times. They did it 5 times. I find it shameful. I was doing the work of my constituents. They wanted me to fight for them. That's exactly what we did. And guess what? We won. I also just want to say that, frankly, the MAGA extremist politicians who are coming after me are also coming after our Democratic Attorney General, Chris Mays. They're calling for her to be impeached. They're calling for President Biden to be impeached. It's a bunch of political theater and nonsense. I'm not distracted by it. I'm focused on the issues that matter, protecting your freedoms and making your life more affordable.
Representative Cabrera, what are your thoughts on the abortion rule that is currently in effect, which forbids abortion except in certain circumstances after 15 weeks?
Well, it was an honor as my first vote to repeal the 1864 abortion ban. And for the fact that the Arizona Supreme Court, again, like my colleague said, it limited a woman's right to choose. And every woman has the right to make their own decision on their health care with their practitioner. And as a mother of 2 daughters, I hope my daughters have the same rights as I did. And so, you know, my colleague Oscar de los Santos had said, that it is theater, and it's theater on women's health and women's rights. And this is something that is so concerning to my community, my district, and our state, that I hope that the legislature, you know, moves forward in enacting and moving forward from this and supporting and giving us our freedoms.
Thank you very much. This next question was specifically drafted by a voter for both of yours opponent, Mr. Ruiz, but I'd like each of you to answer instead. For background, in 2019, Mr. Ruiz's father was the only member of the State Board of Education opposed to eliminating a rule that requires sex education classes in Arizona to, quote, promote honor and respect for monogamous heterosexual marriage. He stated that eliminating the rule would result in discrimination, quote, against members of the faith community. Like I said, Mr. Ruiz is not here, but I want to hear from both of you on how you aim to address the continuing culture war that has focused on LGBTQ+ people in our schools. Representative Cabrero, you can have this first.
Thank you so much. It's really about the rights of all, reproductive rights, health rights, and the fact that there was someone who sat in the previous position and promoted a divisive support upon this community is just offensive, really. And the fact that we have someone who is supporting that same thought process and not giving the community a fair fight, a fair share to what they deserve is something that I don't support. Now, if this continues, this is what drives and really breaks our party apart. This isn't what democratic values are about. They're not what we support. And I hope that we move forward from this issue and don't bring it back again.
Representative Dos Santos.
Yes, I'm actually shocked and horrified, frankly, to hear about this. And I don't think hate has a home in the Democratic Party. I don't think homophobia should have a home in the Democratic Party. And I don't think bigotry should have a home in the Democratic Party. I am an out and proud gay man and the co-chair of the legislature's LGBT caucus. So every day, one of the top priorities that I take on is making sure that every single Arizonan is treated equally under the law, regardless of your race or gender or income or sexual orientation or gender identity. And I've been proud to introduce legislation, which is the boldest, toughest piece of legislation to outlaw discrimination in the state of Arizona. A lot of people don't know this, but a gay nurse can actually be fired for their sexual orientation. A plumber can be denied a promotion. A family can be kicked out simply because their mom is a lesbian. And it's all 100% legal. And so I introduced the statewide Anti-Discrimination Act to put an end to that insanity. I think that workers should be judged on their merit and qualifications and should not be discriminated against. I'm also proud to introduce a ballot referral to change the Arizona Constitution. A lot of people don't know this, but Article 30 of the Arizona Constitution still bans marriage equality. And the only reason that same-sex marriage is legal in the state of Arizona is it's hanging on by a thread of a US Supreme Court decision. And we've seen the MAGA-controlled Republican US Supreme Court is unafraid to take back our rights and freedoms and throw us back to 1864. So it's perfectly conceivable, and Clarence Thomas has said this, that he wants to overturn that ruling that makes same-sex marriage legal. And if that happens, the day after, marriage equality is gone in the state of Arizona. So I introduced a constitutional amendment that 100% protects and legalizes in the Arizona Constitution.
I'm going to stop you there because I actually do have a question related to some stuff that you brought up related to this. But within the same vein, HIV rates among young people in Arizona is at an alarmingly high rates and going the opposite of the nation. Syphilis is doing the same among gay men. Chlamydia is also rising among young women. Advocates and public health experts have said that this is a direct problem with the state's sex education and lack of oversight into what is being taught. This question is for you, Representative Cavero. As a mother, what should sex education look like for your children in schools?
First of all, we should have sex education in our schools. And I know in some practices they prefer not. But the fact is, if you don't educate your children, you create circumstances and challenges for them in the near future and even earlier. And so in public education, I do believe we should provide sex education. And I do believe that it is something that our children should have, that not only the education, but the information and be able to prevent certain situations, such as what you shared today. I think that most of the time we talk about education as a crisis, but it's a crisis towards having our children learn and being engaged and educated in certain practices makes them better people and better human beings.
Wonderful. Last question on this, and it goes back to you, Representative Dos Santos. kind of what you were just speaking about. So you were the main sponsor of an anti-discrimination bill. You just mentioned it last year that was backed by a number of LGBTQ plus groups, but it also went against another bill that would have done the same thing with religious carve-outs. Both of those bills ended up going nowhere, and internally among those groups, there was recognition those bills wouldn't go anywhere. Can you explain why you proposed legislation that you knew, or at least had been warned, wouldn't even get a hearing? What good does that do for the residents in your district?
That's a terrific question, and it's one I want to address because one of the things that folks may not know is that when the majority party controls the entire chamber, and that means that the Republicans get to decide which bills get heard, which bills don't get heard. And you may be shocked, or maybe not, to learn that something like 98 or 99% of Democratic bills never, ever get a committee hearing. What happens? The speaker receives the Democratic bill and it goes in the trash. And so that's why it's so important that we vote this November so we can flip the legislature and enact real Democratic priorities. Because if you look at the bills that Democrats have passed, there are some rare instances where Democrats do get bills passed. Oftentimes, they're sort of teeny tiny bills. I don't want to, belittle them, but it's oftentimes like a license plate bill for a charity that wants a new license plate or something like that. So the Republicans simply do not allow us to pass any Democratic legislation. But listen, it's my job to fight for my constituents. It's my job to introduce the legislation that they want to see and that they deserve. And frankly, this is the legislation that so many of my constituents and community groups asked me to introduce, and I was proud to introduce it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Before we move on to the next topic, again, if you're just tuning in, voters that are watching this debate live, you can submit a question at any time by email at debates@kc.a/a.com. Again, that's debates@kc/a. Oh my gosh, kc-a.com. I apologize. You can text us at 408-302-1810, or you can call us at 480-937-1253. Moving on to the next topic that is mainly a federal problem, but has been flipped to local elected officials trying to solve for it in their own ways: immigration. This question is going to be for both of you. Multiple voters have asked questions about what you want to do about the border. Understanding that a lot of this can't be solved at the state or local level, what bills would you put forth or advocate for to address voters' concerns in immigration, among them being we are inhumane to people seeking a shelter or asylum, and that there are too many illegal crossings? You each have 90 seconds. I'll start with Representative Cavero.
Well, Joseph, just so you know, I've been in my position for just a few weeks due to the new appointment. And so all I do know is that I would fully protect our undocumented residents from unjust deportations and support pathways to citizenship. Now, any bill related and aligned with that, I would fully support. Now, today, if you don't know, we have an HCR 2060, which has impacted our immigration and could impact greatly. It makes our local law enforcement enforce a federal immigration law, which down the road, we've been through this before with SB 1070, and this will cause more racial profiling. Now, Maricopa County is still paying for the lawsuits of over $300 million to settle these lawsuits against Joe Arpaio. This referendum is going to cost a tremendous amount of money, which we don't know. And our business community are in fear of the impacts of our economy and our tourism. We need to address immigration, but this is not the way.
Representative De Los Santos.
Absolutely. I want to echo what Representative Cavero said. I strongly oppose HCR 2060. I think it is racist. I also think it's unconstitutional. And every major business group in the state has come out against it. Law enforcement has come out against it. Every single county on the border has come out against it. And of course, immigrant groups have come out against it. It is boneheaded, ridiculous, wrong, and a job killer. Now, when it comes to what I would affirmatively like to do, you're right that immigration is typically handled at the federal level. We are not federal officials, but what I would like to see are a pathway to citizenship. It's time to make sure that we bring people out of the shadows, ensure that they have the ability to work and pay taxes and openly contribute to their society. I want to make sure that dreamers are protected. I also want to make sure that we take on any violence that may be occurring at the border due to cartels. But I also want to make sure that we're clear that the fentanyl crisis is actually mostly being driven by criminal syndicates inside the United States that are using American citizens to transport drugs from Mexico into the United States through legal ports of entry. So if you look at the statistics, it's something like over 90%, perhaps even over 95% of the fentanyl that is coming into this country is being transported by US citizens through legal ports of entry. So it's simply not true that undocumented migrants or asylum seekers or refugees are the folks who are bringing these drugs along. And that's why I support the proposal in Governor Hobbs's budget that includes millions of dollars of funding for fentanyl interdiction. I also think that Attorney General Chris Mays has done a good job working with local law enforcement officials and border communities, as well as federal officials, to take on the sort of ringleaders of these drug cartels, whether they're in the United States or Mexico. But I think there is absolutely a pathway to a secure border that also treats people with dignity and respect, because migrants are oftentimes facing some of the worst horrifying conditions that frankly we cannot even imagine. This country was built by immigrants, including my parents, including Representative Cavero's ancestors, family and parents, and immigration and diversity makes us strong.
A follow-up to this. Both of you have mentioned that you don't agree with the bill that's been compared to SB 1070, the infamous Show Me Your Papers law. Assuming a similar layout to the House in January 2025, meaning Republican control even by a small margin, how do you expect to treat this in a bipartisan manner to get something done, as far as even what you both have proposed tonight? Or is that impossible? I'll send that over to De Los Santos first.
It's up to the Republicans. This entire session, Democrats have been at the table, willing to roll up our sleeves, negotiate, and find a compromise. And they sort of use immigration as a political football. I don't think they're serious about the solution, and they're not. And that's exactly why law enforcement and business opposes SB 1070 2.0. So if they're willing to stop playing politics and actually come and negotiate, we might have a solution. And we're, to be clear, seeing this at the state level because they're imitating what's happening at the federal level. At the federal level, there was a bipartisan deal negotiated by President Biden and Republicans in Congress. What happened? Donald Trump came in. He said, no, kill the deal. Why? Because he didn't want to solve the border issue, because he wanted to use it as a political football during the election. That is exactly what the Republicans in the state legislature are doing. And I will remind folks watching that the Speaker of the House here in Arizona is actually running for Congress. And so almost everything that happens inside the Arizona House is designed to, help his campaign. So hopefully when we have a new legislature, we can get something done. But really, it is on the Republicans to act like adults and find solutions.
Representative Cavero, any comment?
Well, in agreement with Representative De Los Santos, all of the above. The issue is, we have to stop the bickering. And it does depend on whether it's going to be a Republican legislature. It's a lot of speculation. You're also speculating whether this bill will actually be passed through. So let's start with stop pushing away from the bargaining table with nothing. Our families and our children really deserve a lot better. And that's short and simple. So hopefully we won't have to come through this, and hopefully we'll have a better outcome in our legislature this upcoming cycle.
Wonderful, thank you. Again, if you're just tuning in, voters that are watching this debate live, you can submit a question at any time by submitting by email to debates@kc-a.com. You can text us at 408-302-1810, or you can call us at 480-937-1253. For a transition into our next topic, I want to lay the land a bit. District 11 includes downtown Phoenix, which has been built up significantly. Thousands of city-owned housing units have been demolished and are now being turned into apartments with sections available for low-income housing. I have one of those demolitions right next to my house right now. Prices for renters has increased dramatically to comparable prices to coastal cities. There is a real problem of affordability in a place that has been long viewed as affordable. Representative De Los Santos, have you in your first term in office done enough to address this problem for your constituents?
It's one of the top issues I've addressed 100%. One of the first bills I introduced was a bill to take on private equity firms, mega corporations, most of them actually headquartered on Wall Street. And they're jacking up the price of rent here in Phoenix and making it impossible for younger families to buy a home. And I want to take a little bit of time to explain how that works exactly. What you have are, sorry.
Don't take too much time, but yeah, go ahead.
Oh boy. These mega corporations come in and they've basically bought up something like a third of the homes on the market here in Arizona, and it's even higher in Maricopa County. And what they're doing is they buy the home, they buy it cash, which does two things. One, now that is a home that is not owned by an Arizona family, it is owned by a private equity firm in New York City. That's ridiculous. Number two, what they do, and this is how renters are screwed over, they turn the home into a rental and they just jack up the price indiscriminately. Or they turn it into a short-term rental, which takes one housing unit out of the market. And when you shrink supply and you keep a constant or higher demand, the price is going to jump. So that is one area that I've been focused on. I've also been a strong supporter and co-sponsor of legislation to cap unfair rent increases, to make sure that we're incentivizing the building of new affordable housing through something called LIHTC, and to make sure that we're speeding up the construction of new homes by cutting some unnecessary red tape at the state level.
Thank you very much. Representative Cavero, if you were to win in this upcoming election, it would be your first full session. What would you do different, or what would you do in your first term to advocate or address housing affordability differently, specifically with the goal of home ownership in your district?
I wouldn't refer to it as what is different. It's what's working in our district. So you take the example, and I'm hoping, if you haven't visited Salt River Flats, is one of the most gorgeous affordable housing developments in our district, and utilize that as an example of how a possible public-private partnership that includes financial support from local and state governments, which, we received $2 million from the Arizona Housing Trust Fund, and hope to replicate that. And I'm so proud that in our district, we're actually building another affordable housing unit, very similar, off of 12th Street. And, Governor Hobbs secured $150 million, to deposit in our Arizona Housing Trust Fund, which is the most significant single investment in that fund. And I'm really proud that the legislature did that this last cycle in 23, and I'm hoping we can continue that, not just in our district, but throughout the state. And this is something I would promote and support, advocate for, and love to share it with everyone else.
Wonderful. Last question on this also came from a voter created question. There is a problem with developers, as you mentioned, Representative De Los Santos, but this is also very much a landlord issue, and the state has long given deference to owners opposed to renters in this space. What will each of you do to address landlords and rising rents if you take office January 2025? I'll go ahead and start with you, Representative Cavero.
Taking over landlords, as Representative De Los Santos had referred to earlier, is these out-of-state investors, out-of-state landlords who don't really care for the fact that our cost of living does not meet our income. And so it's very, very difficult in trying to limit the actual measures to having landlords, invest or have more investors, as you can say, who are out of state, continue their practices. We really need to put a cap. If you're not living in Arizona, you should be actually limited in the amount of property that you're purchasing, really, frankly, because you, if from what I remember, only need one home. You don't need 5 or 6. And so it's really capping, out-of-state investment in our housing. And that's really the core base of trying to figure out how to limit these landlord rents. On top of that, I'm fully supportive on, rental control. Now, how can we do that? Working with the city and everyone else. And I do know that, in the legislature, we did pass a few initiatives, but there are a few things we still have to work on. And so I'm happy to punt that over to my colleague who can answer probably a little bit more.
Representative De Los Santos.
Absolutely co-sign that. I also think that one of the next bills I'm looking to introduce is taking this corporate accountability piece a little bit further and looking at which corporations are owning housing that's over a certain amount of units. So if you have like 500, no, we're going to have to force you to start selling them off, or we're going to place a surtax, a penalty for every additional home that a corporation owns, and we're going to use that revenue to fund affordable housing programs. And one of the things I actually want to fund is an eviction defense program. Arizona is one of the states in this country that actually does not guarantee right to counsel for renters who are facing evictions proceedings. And when you look at the data, it's quite horrifying. And I want to pause here and I want to emphasize when you look at the data, because I govern via evidence-based policy. And so I look at what other states or cities or counties are doing, or even countries, and see what's working. And one of the things that absolutely works is making sure that when you go to eviction court, you have a level legal playing field, because these corporations have some of the highest paid fancy schmancy lawyers that money can buy. And over 90% of the time, renters do not have an attorney. And so even if the renter has a very good case, even if they should win, you can't win because you're going up against, God knows, some big law attorney who's going to crush you. And regardless of whether you're right or wrong, they can use every procedural tactic in the book. So I want to make sure that folks that are going through evictions proceedings have a level playing field and have their rights defended.
Wonderful. Thank you. Before we move to the next topic, we do have a viewer question. Arizona has a $1.4 billion budget deficit heading into the budget process. What are your priorities to protect, and how will you balance the budget? Representative De Los Santos, you've been through this budget process before. So what have you been doing to ensure that we are getting back on our toes now that we have a massive deficit? I'll start with you first.
Absolutely. So in order to understand how to fix the deficit, you have to understand how we got into the deficit. And this is a structural deficit that has been created over decades of atrocious Republican budgeting policies and atrocious Republican economic policies. Among them are the ESA vouchers, which are completely unaccountable. ABC 15 did a story yesterday that some of these vouchers, which by the way is just like a debit card that they send to rich families so they can theoretically pay for their kids to go to school. A lot of people are actually homeschooling their kids and remodeling their kitchens because they want to teach the culinary arts. Yesterday, one of the stories that we saw was they spent over $3,000 at a golf club because they wanted to teach their child PE. So this is insane. It's ridiculous. And it has blown up our budget to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars. We need to rein that program in and bring some fiscal accountability and common sense transparency to the program. That's number one. Number two, one of the last acts of Republican Governor Doug Ducey was instituting a massive tax giveaway to the wealthy that has robbed our state of money. And now we are in a situation because of those tax giveaways to the wealthy where we cannot fund serious pay increases for our teachers. We can't fund affordable housing. So I think we need to return to an era of common sense tax policy where the ultra wealthy and corporations are paying their fair share. That's how we can close this budget deficit and ensure we have the resources we need to invest in our community, to invest in healthcare, in housing, and in our schools.
I do want to give some pushback because in 2022, Arizona had a $5.3 billion surplus before the 2023 legislative session. So there is understanding that as that's been caused by ESAs, but I want to push back on one thing you just said and kind of maybe ask if you could rephrase or kind of explain a bit more. When you say that decades of Republican control has led to this deficit, I wonder if you could maybe also explain why then we had a $5.3 billion surplus.
We had a $5.3 surplus because of federal funding that flooded the state from COVID. So when COVID hit, when the pandemic hit, obviously many places closed, the economy ground to a halt. And what the federal government said was, whoa, a lot of states or cities are going to go broke if we don't intervene and so that's when the federal government, the president and Congress passed a series of COVID relief packages that infused funding into the states. And what we saw was, you're right, a $5 billion surplus, but it was an artificial surplus that was one time. And now that money's been spent, and now we're back to the real deal. It's like if you're working a job and you're underpaid, and let's say you're, being paid less than minimum wage or something, and you suddenly get a one-time bonus, that doesn't fix your problem. It was good for a year, but it's not going to be structurally correct. So that's my answer.
Representative Caveira, going back to the original question that the viewer asked. So going into next year's budget process, or even this year, because we haven't quite wrapped up this yet, what are your priorities to balance the budget?
Well, let's just be clear, this is a deficit. That means we're not going to be happy in every capacity, in every agency, every department, and every program. Most of it will be hit. Hopefully, we're trying to fight that it doesn't get hit too hard. And we're not talking about just 1 year. We're talking about several years because of this situation. Now, what I would advocate for, what I plan to, and what's first and foremost is our education. We're already having problems. We don't have enough pay for our teachers and staff. We don't have better work conditions. Our infrastructure, our after-school programs, they're all getting hit. Now, the focus is really trying to maintain what we have and hopefully reinvest back into it more by removing certain provisions from the ESA program, which my colleague had spoken about before. Now, at the end of the day, we need to support our children by supporting our teachers in our public schools. So that's the first and foremost coming into the next session while we're dealing with the deficit, and keeping in mind that our kids have the right to a good public quality education. Remember, 90% of this state goes to a public school. So we should be focusing our efforts into a good public education.
Great. Thank you very much. Before we move to the last topic of the night, again, this is the last push. If you have any questions you want to ask any of these candidates, you can submit your question anytime by email at debates@kc-a.com. You can text us at 408-302-1810, or you can call us at 480-937-1253. So second to the last topic of the night is climate. In relation to housing and livability, as Phoenix develops further into a heat island, as we build more and attract more residents, there will continue to be issues with access to water, livability, and the safety of people living on the streets. For both of you, this is one of the subjects of a hefty number of voters have been curious about, so I'd like some thoughtful answers on this. Point to an example where you see the climate effect having an effect on your constituency. You each have 90 seconds. I'll start with Representative De Los Santos.
I wish we had 3 hours. The asthma rates in our district are significantly higher than the asthma rates compared to the entire state. And they're almost double that if you compare us to wealthier areas like Scottsdale. And that has serious effects because, in particular, these respiratory diseases are hitting our senior citizens especially, and our children especially. And when you look at mortality rates, the average age of death, the lifespan in our district is in the low 70s. If you look at Scottsdale, Paradise Valley, it's in the mid to high 80s. We are literally dying 12 to 14 years younger. Those are years off of people's lives, in part because of these respiratory diseases. And if you go down Broadway and that sort of area, you see why we have become a center of polluting facilities. And we long have been. It's due to a lot of things, but frankly, environmental racism and environmental classism is some of them. And I've been proud to introduce legislation to tackle this issue.
Wonderful. Representative Caveiro, same question to you.
Well, I'm in full agreement with Representative De Los Santos and everything that he shared about our district. And, one of the things that I do want to bring up in this topic is that, it's in the long run, we're also going to have to be talking about sustainable water issues in our district. And we haven't been talking about that tonight, but I do want to promote that, there are ways to combine technology with building better water practices. And for example, the Gila River Indian Reservation has a solar covered hangars, and they're the first in the nation to install a solar water panels on top that would tremendously impact our district and our state. And hopefully later down the line that, folks will figure out that these solar panels also create shade for our irrigation canals, which goes right through our district, and will reduce water evaporation by about 50%. So these are ways and practices that we need to actually ensure, not just, in Gila River, but really best practices in our district and in our whole state. So hopefully that'll be a great example in the future.
Wonderful. Going to our last topic of the night. To end the debate, we're going to talk about the future of our state's democracy. I want to start off with both candidates explaining a bit on what they believe makes a good lawmaker. I'll start with Representative Cavero. What makes a good and effective lawmaker to you?
To me, it's about trust. It's about understanding the community. It's about understanding their concerns and advocating, and really truly building that leadership by building that relationship with the community. You have to actually understand. You can't advocate for those you don't know. You got to hit the doors. You got to talk to the businesses. You got to talk to the people, and you got to understand their concerns and build from that. And when you get to the leadership and when you arrive at the legislature, it's working with those who agree with you so you can build better policy at the end of the day. And having that is building trust with your electorate, your constituents, and trust with those who you work with at the legislature.
Thank you. Representative De Los Santos, what makes a good lawmaker?
I would say three things. One, to echo Representative Vera, listening to your constituents. Two, not being bought out by big business and big corporations and the lobbyists down there. You are an independent voice for the people, not the politicians or the lobbyists. So I think that's really key. And the third thing is you got to strike a balance between being a fighter for your principles and standing up for what's right, while also being able to work with people who disagree with you and understand when to compromise, how to negotiate without compromising your values. And I think that's a pretty difficult thing to do sometimes. It's my first term. It's something that I'm still learning, but I think it's something that I frankly, I think I've done well. So thank you.
This question is for you, Representative Los Santos, for the people in your district, because I think LD11 is kind of a no-brainer that it's a fairly blue district, and there's not, but there is a sizable portion that are still independent and red and Republican. So for people who in your district who don't believe you represent their ideals or politics, I'd like you to address them right now. What will you do over the next 5 months if you win the primary? What will you do over the next 5 months before Election Day to reach and connect with them?
I talk to people and constituents who disagree with me almost every single day. And that's Republicans, that's independents, that's even Democrats. There are no two human beings who agree on every single issue. I mean, you look at people who are married and sometimes even they just clash, me within my friends and family, we don't all have the same view. So I'm very comfortable and have worked with people and speak to people who have different values than I do or different ideas than they do. But I think the most important thing for me to do as an elected official is to listen, one, and two, to explain my reasoning. That is a respect I will always have for my constituents. I will listen to you to try to change my opinion or, hear feedback about what you think. But I won't just listen. I think it's also my responsibility to explain my thought process behind certain decisions I've made. So those are the two things I would say. And lastly, by the way, check my voting record. I am a committed Democrat, but I have voted for dozens and dozens and dozens, maybe 100 Republican bills. So I'm able, I think, to walk both lines here.
Representative Cavero, same question for you, an opportunity to kind of address the haters. It's the same exercise, but slightly different. For the voters watching who disagree with your politics, what do they need to understand about you and your past that informs your politics?
For many who don't know me, my mother is a staunch Republican. My father is a staunch Democrat. We have somehow been able to have a happy marriage over 45 years because of respect, because of trust, and more importantly, because you can agree to disagree. Those values are what holds you together. And more importantly, I look forward to learning about your differences, about areas that I am weak at so that I know better and I can advocate better. But more importantly, if there is a difference, that's a strength. And that's what you have to understand, that I hope to be there for you despite, and hopefully be well informed to make decisions. And if I made a decision that you're not too happy with, hopefully you know my door's always open so that I can actually have a conversation with you. And hopefully we can come to an agreement to work together and build better policy for both our homes, our families, and our district.
Wonderful. And then moving on to the last question of the night. There is considerable frustration about gridlock and grandstanding in our state capitol. Bills being proposed that people will know that will never get vetoed or simply never heard. I would like a very clear answer from both of you right now for the viewers who are watching. Assuming that we could still have a gridlock capitol next year, what will each of you commit to for ensuring bipartisan action that moves Arizonans forward? Representative De Los Santos, I'll let you go first.
I think the most important thing I'm going to work on, where I feel I can actually gain serious bipartisan support, are my corporate accountability bills. They were actually supported by Republicans in Ohio, is where I got the idea from. And so clearly this has bipartisan support. I think we can bring in some of those Republicans here because they supported them in Ohio. And it was actually also supported by frankly, a MAGA Republican United States Senator from Ohio, J.D. Vance, a strong Trump supporter. So I think, sometimes politics makes for strange bedfellows, and this is one of those times because I think there's broad agreement that we have to do something about housing. And I think on both parties, there's an emerging consensus that we have mega corporations that are not particularly playing by fair market rules here. So I'm looking forward to developing those bills. I'm sure we'll see amendments and yeah.
Representative Cavero, what will you commit to next year for ensuring bipartisan action that moves Arizonans forward if you win the primary and eventually the election?
Well, I currently sit on the Military Affairs and Public Safety Commission. And so those are two that I hope to push forward and work together and learn more with my colleagues to work on bills that and agree with, work on bills and policies that we can agree upon. And that to me is very important because someone who's worked for 25 years and trying to push legislation to provide veterans equity, provide better housing and healthcare to veterans, those issues are not bipartisan. And so hopefully working together on building policies in one area, we can build together on other areas well together.
Thank you very much. We're now going to move into closing arguments. The first closing statement will be made by Representative De Los Santos. You have 1 minute.
Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. And I hope I've earned your support. As I think you've heard, I am a staunch defender of our public education. As a former public school teacher, I defend abortion access and reproductive freedom. And at the same time, I think I'm able to work on a bipartisan basis to deliver real solutions. I helped pass Prop 400E, which is the biggest transportation and infrastructure bill in over 20 years here in the state of Arizona. I hope to earn your support. And I also hope that you vote for Janelle Cavero. She has been a fantastic seatmate. And I think we're a heck of a team. So thank you for watching. Vote for Oscar De Los Santos and Janelle Cavero.
Representative Cavero.
Oh, thank you so much for those. Thank you so much for watching tonight and for Joseph, your time and your first experience. It's also mine, so I really appreciate it. But, as a mother, a small business owner, and someone who's been in government affairs for 20 years, the the purpose and why I want to represent is to fight for each one in my district, to build that pipeline, to bring access to everything that we need. We've talked about for so many topics tonight, but one step line was, yes, voting for reproductive freedom. It's one of many to come. And someone who's advocated for countless Democratic candidates, after this primary, our biggest job is getting out the vote for President Joe Biden and Ruben Gallego for Senate. It's an honor to have the endorsements of both the senator and Mayor Valerie Molina and many others in our district. And I hope that you support both my colleague and I tonight. It was just a taste of what we can talk about. Hopefully, I look forward to meeting you at the doors. So have a great night.
Great. This concludes our debate. To both of the candidates, I thank you so much for participating tonight. Thank you for answering some tough questions and giving us some honest answers and giving us your time. To the voters, we thank all of you who took the time to watch the debate and inform yourselves before the July 30th primary election. We encourage you to visit azcleanelections.gov for official, accurate voting information. Have a good night.